Yeah, thanks. Hi, everybody. I hope you can hear me well.
Yep.
Been jumping a little bit between different sessions and every time setting up my audio devices new. So yeah, good evening from Germany at least. It's 9 p.m. here, and I was following the last minutes of the discussion, and perhaps I want to follow up on what Nick said because I really like that as a vision, especially that out of the box approach. And although my presentation, I'm also joined by Unibright's CEO and my co-founder Martin, uh, is about SAP. Perhaps it's not so much about SAP because the challenges that all integration projects have, and that will hopefully be solved 1 year from now by Baseline, or at least we have another opportunity to solve these integration projects. All of these face the same challenges, and it does not matter so much if you are talking about an SAP system or perhaps Dynamics or Salesforce. And we had already great detailed presentations on these specific ones earlier on this track. Um, what I think the great thing about Baseline um, that sums it up is that it's not driven by one of the mentioned big ERP players, but that it's really coming from the protocol point of things. And that's actually the chance. So my wish for Baseline 1 year from today would be actually that the world gets to know about the advantages of an integration approach that is not driven mainly by one of the big players, but rather is coming from a community, from an integration community, as I understand it, because this really gives the opportunity to include and integrate all players, not only those who are able to run a big ERP system, but perhaps integrate their Google Sheets or their local database or their proprietary self-development solution, but still be part of a network that enables to put additional trust into business processes. So that's what I hope that 1 year from now, many uh, individuals, companies, associations, enterprises, developers, integration companies understand the power that is behind the idea of Baseline, actually.
Thank you, Stefan and Martin. So really quickly before we pass this off, what I want to do is just uh, I'm not going to start from the beginning and go all over because that would take a couple hours. But what I want to do is just kind of provide a recap because we're actually almost at the end of the breakout session, and we had a lot of good discussions. And just I see a bunch of new faces in this room. So just quickly setting the stage here. This breakout session is intended for those that are developers, are business users, are administrators, are into code, are into use cases, etc., or just want to learn about what the baseline protocol is really all about. What we did was, we started to talk about what the intro to the baseline protocol is. And then we, had this interactive session where folks can help define it in terms that makes it more, clear and concise. We went into the standards of the standards of modern applications, but really it's the standards of the baseline protocol as it relates to all the different core interfaces. And again, just to shout that out, we have the core interfaces breakout session 2. Then what I did was went into a baseline Microsoft Dynamics 365 environment, which started out actually, with the Unibright team and Provide and Envision and others, and we got together and put together this demo. We had people log into the D365 environment. So Stefan and Martin, you guys weren't here. We showed them a D365 to another D365 environment. They clicked around, they got to experience what it would be like to send things out. We kind of highlighted some of the points that also is documented in the Eminent Task Force hackathon too. So feel free to talk about that one. How we use the out of the box modules. And then we just tied together some of the, product cookbook ideas, how we would integrate with the global phone book, where the core interfaces came in, uh, and how integration really looks like it's native out of D365. And Dom did the same thing. So then after that, Dom went and explained baseline Salesforce. And now, if I can, I'll turn the mic over to the Unibright team to discuss baseline SAP.
Thanks, Dan. Perfect. I can share my screen, I guess. Okay, can you see my PowerPoint session?
Yes. Yes, we did.
Thanks, Dom.
Yep.
I want to perhaps first take a step back. This presentation was initially also considered to be part of the cookbook session that is now part of the roundtable later. And for that cookbook session, understanding a cookbook as something that, I changed the slide, a cookbook to create recipes for available ingredients, and where the recipes can be best practices or reference implementations like the one that Dan just mentioned in context of the EA Eminent Task Force hackathons. And the ingredients can be the defining parameters of your specific business process. So if we're talking about a cookbook that somebody would have a look into, if he knows some of the ingredients he has and he perhaps knows his favorite dish, then he can take a look into the cookbook on how actually find the right way or the right algorithm to or the right workflow steps to baseline a process. And before we get to the details of SAP, it's really important for me personally and also for our Unibright team that we take this on a little bit on a generic level. Every party that wants to be a part of a participant in the baseline process somehow has the same challenges as I mentioned just before. There are different systems of record involved. There's a specific document flow to the process that should be baselined. And all the end users, I mean, we should not forget about that. Of course, baseline is a protocol, and it's a great protocol, and it's also real fun to dive into the specifics of a protocol on the very, say, lowest technical layer. But in the end, if we are talking about a vision on who will use baseline in 1 year from now, then in the end, it's about making a customer experience for the end users of a respective ERP system that is part of a baseline process. So we have to ask the question, no matter if it's a SAP system or if it's just a custom built small database based application, at what layer do participants need to view the baseline status and the messages, and what are the integration points? So our approach at the hackathons we are been running, and also at the client projects we are currently doing with, for example, Kona and Fraunhofer, is exactly answering these questions first before we dive into the details on how SAP can baseline, say, a purchase order. And something that we always promoted, and also something that we learned in the baseline context to be even more important, is to talk about the right domain models. So just a short side note on how Unibright is doing it. Together with Provide, we are building products around the baseline pattern. We have been building a no-code blockchain framework already before that, and this is now getting adapted to baseline. And the first point here is the visual definition of domain models, and that's actually already the central point of our approach. That if you want to have an integration happening between different parties, you have to have something both parties or all parties can rely on, no matter what the underlying system of record may look like. And this is what we understand as common domain models. So at least the most important fields, attributes, or states or methods for, of example, a purchase order. And it may be that there's a leading system in a process and that you just take the, say, SAP model of a purchase order as the domain model that all parties have to rely on. It's totally fine if the driving entity is heavily relying on SAP. But still, all parties have to have or must have the chance to understand this domain model and integrate their respective system by that domain model into a baseline process. So everything we do, the visual definition of processes and circuits in the baseline context, code generation, deployment, automatic mapping from domain models to, for example, to SAP, or even proxy generation, API generation. All this is relying on the common understanding of a domain model of the objects that you want to baseline.
Yeah, I mean, Stefan, perhaps I can add something to it. It's Martin from Unibright here. As we so much emphasize on domain models, it's not only about the technical side of things, but about the process side of things as well. I mean, for our customers, we know that they live and they think in their processes. So it's super vital that when we have let's say a purchasing scenario, we need, on a technical level, we need functions or API calls that somehow do things like send a purchase order or receive a quote. But this is vital too for all the people that design the distributed business processes within a company, that we get onto this level, because that's where these people are. We can't do, or we can't have any blockchain specifics on this level, because these people are just, they are not known to it. So it's extremely vital to get on this domain model if you want to do, let's say, real world projects with customers or companies that are not experienced in blockchain thinking patterns.
Exactly, and I think this is also great potential for baseline, because now with baseline you have an argumentation towards using blockchain in enterprise processes, where blockchain is really used for that part of the implementation logic where it really provides the most benefit in enabling trust, but perhaps not on replacing everything that a local enterprise ERP system is able to do. I mean, that was more of the pitch of the last, say, or 3 years ago, when it came to the idea that we could just replace every ERP system by that big distributed database called blockchain, or 1 year later we could replace every custom-built business logic by a world computer with smart contracts. So with baseline, we finally get to the point that we also can solve classic long existing integration challenges or even problems, because we have something that starts with domain modeling and starts with easy integration of whatever ERP system into a common stack, and then uses an underlying protocol to exchange messages and to countersign them and to establish an additional level of trust. Perhaps we give a short example of 2 projects that we're currently working on, which both have an SAP in the background as one system of record. And the first one is the project that we're doing together with Kona, and without getting too much into the details, as this is still work in progress. As in all projects, when it comes to baselining that we are currently working at, it's about an object sequence that is established already. So, I mean, this process is not new with baseline. It's been there for decades. For example, in this case, placing purchase orders and sending them to potential vendors, which will then turn purchase orders into sales orders, in a later point in time, create delivery notifications that reference these sales orders. And then you have an ongoing object sequence or document flow, as you would call it in SAP, from shipment over goods issues, goods receipts, until you have something like a billing document, an invoice that could even be tokenized afterwards. So the object sequence can be as complex or as long as the case desires. But the thing with baseline is that you can baseline each of the states of this workflow. So each of the documents that represent a workflow step in a complete process from ordering to invoicing, and have multiple parties agreeing on the same state that is represented in their respective ERP system. And this is just one example where you can see that if you start a project with a customer, it's not so much about baselining in the first place. It's not so much about explaining zero knowledge proofs on saying a sales order. It's very much classical integration topics or even consulting topics when it comes to defining the right object sequence and defining the right the right participants to be part of the process.
Yeah, but I think that's the great potential. I mean, it's, as you said, Stefan, it's all these processes that already exist, and every big company does, for example, some purchasing, and so we always have these object sequences we can baseline. So by enabling these already existing business processes to do something unique, let's say use the trusted middleware that we can add with baseline, doing it that way, that we can really focus on getting this unique addition to distributed business processes. It's much easier than starting with pitching blockchain or starting with zero knowledge proofs. It's much easier to have this business process in place and then tell the customer, oh, now we can have this great technical addition that wasn't possible before.
Exactly, and it's also showing the potential in terms of that many unsolved problems still have to do with that some players are kept out of an integration process, because I mean, every participant in a, say, procurement process knows his business. He knows how he's creating the goods receipts. He knows how his daily process looks like, and perhaps the issue of not being part of a, say, a supplier network or something is not because they don't understand the process or they would not be able to deliver the desired quality, but rather that they are not able to be part of a digital and automated process. So this is also one of the goals of baseline, to make this more to make integration more attractive even to smaller players, or to a consortium where we perhaps have a big player as the leading entity and many smaller players like suppliers adding to the process. We can take a look at what this should look like for when it really comes to the rollout of a new project. This is also an example from the Kona project, and also from the Fraunhofer project that we're doing. We think that it's very important with every integration process that you distinguish between the different levels of a project. In this case, the design time, the deploy time, and the runtime. Currently, when we are starting a new project, we spend most of the time in the really like hours, days, or weeks in the design time. So defining the models and also the mappings to existing systems, and to get the process right. And once that project is up and running, or at least in a state where you can roll out a beta version, including some pilot suppliers or whatever, it always comes to an easy deployment, which is also important in a scenario that is built in a way that new participants should be able to join at any time. So in our case, building this together with Provide, we have at design time, we have the Unibright modeling tools, and in deploy time, the Provide shuttle tools to have an automatic setup, so that in runtime you can rely on all these previously designed and published parts of the system. in this case, we have a connector. We have different containers representing the Unibright, the provide stack, and the actual baseline stack. But it's important to show that understanding first, because we get now into details of an SAP implementation, how we did it there. But it's important to understand that the SAP implementation comes into the picture earliest at the deploy time, and then of course at runtime, but that many integration projects fail or because there's not enough effort or not enough time or resources or domain specialists during the design time of the process. This does not change with baseline. You still have to get your process right, but baseline can provide a lot of tools helping you that once you got the process right on a definition level, it just works, and you really can concentrate on your daily business. Okay, so also one high-level example how we did this in the Kona project. So let's just, for an example, take a purchase order that comes out of a SAP system and is due to be sent to different vendors that are part of that process. We had the feeling that it's, or not the feeling, we are convinced that it's better for the client that there's a certain level of control of the data flow towards a new, say, tech stack or technology when it comes to running in SAP. So, of course, we could just offer the baseline APIs as they are currently there in the great reference implementations, which work just fine. But still, in the daily project, there will be a lot of requests for enrichment of data or perhaps of additional approval steps that are completely out of blockchain scope, just within the SAP system. So what we did is that the complete message control, and also a part that we defined or we designed with our Unibright subconnector, where you can model different workflow steps within the SAP, which then get baseline. So on the left side, everything we need to stay within SAP is also code-wise, it's still in SAP, because there we model the actual process from the leading system. We model different workflow steps. And when it comes to baselining different messages or documents like a purchase order, we then have a dedicated point within the SAP coding, like function modules with REST APIs on top that can talk to, in this case, our provide in Unibright baseline as a service stack. You find again the domain objects here on the right side, and this is of course by purpose, because everybody who would not be able to run an SAP system would still rely on the same underlying stack from the baseline message over a more meaningful object away from the message layer, and then mapped into a purchase order domain object in this case. And this is also the entry point where every other ERP could be integrated. And this finally leads to what we wanted to talk about when we said that SAP is just one example. All these questions that we have and answered in SAP with an internal workflow management, with status management, with or like Daniel showed earlier within Dynamics, with specific UI elements that show a certain baseline status, all these questions still have to be answered on a UI level or on an end system level for every party that wants to be baselined. But all these questions can be answered based on at least a domain object model that is common with all the participants of a work group. That's the idea behind this message flow and component structure.
Yeah. I just had the idea that, I mean, this slide is, I think it's the core slide on integration. Stefan, perhaps this would be a good point in time to ask for any questions. I mean, this.
Yep. Also taking a look at the chat.
Yeah.
Oh, I can see it while presenting while sharing the screen.
There's no current question in the chat, but perhaps someone wants to ask something. I mean, just to rephrase what is very important to me being visualized by this slide is, I don't know if everyone is familiar with this term IDOC, orders 05, in the second box on the left-hand side. I mean, this is the standard EDI format or standard EDI document that is used within SAP. So it's nothing special to blockchain or to anything. It's just like Kona is using IDOCs today for the electronic data exchange. And so we just stay in that domain. They already know how to exchange orders of 5 IDOCs. And then that makes it much easier for them if we just stay there, take that IDOC, and then convert it into a JSON representation, and then get it into our own stack. So from a customer's perspective, that's much healthier than exposing any techie API calls.
Yeah, especially when it comes to the reusability. Of course, 80% of also shown on the left side could be easily be used in other projects. In fact, currently we are building multiple POCs at a time, but as often it turns out that 80% or around 80% of different processes are still comparable, and the last 20% needs some customization on client level, and finding that right line between the 80% and the 20% should, in our opinion, or at least that's our approach and our hope, should be exactly the line between these two stacks. So, for example, if we take a look, this was the Kona example. If we take a look at the Fraunhofer case we're currently working on, just to give some context, it's about a 3D laser printing device that is equipped with IoT sensors that continuously deliver data about the performance of the machine. This protocol data is sent to SAP as measurement documents, and the idea behind is to have these protocol data aggregated and baselined, for example, once a day, and sent out to all potential suppliers that may be able to deliver a specific maintenance service, or, for example, cooling liquid if the machine is or the sensor of the machine is notifying that there's a problem with cooling liquid. And as soon as specific values in that protocol messages are surpassing specific thresholds, then we automatically have a maintenance message and then we are again inside an SAP workflow, which is independent from if the underlying or the following integration technique is baselined or not, which is triggering an internal SAP workflow on mapping the maintenance message to the right service or product, finding potential vendors for this service or product, triggering a request for quotation process, quotations and purchase orders following after that. So, I mean, the setup is something completely different than talking about purchase orders in, for example, in the Coca-Cola world. But from a baseline perspective, as soon as it comes to document flows or object sequences that are baselined, it's quite comparable, at least on the 80% of how to connect an ERP system to the baseline stack. And this is also why we are often asked, okay, what are the use cases for baseline and which industries can baseline serve? And our answers is that baseline should be something that's more, in our understanding, that's more or less use case independent, because it's really more an integration pattern or a document sequence trust adding pattern, and not so much, it should not be narrowed down to specific cases like supply chain. We all need these cases and these projects and these POCs to show the the power of something like baseline, but baseline is not narrowed down or reduced to specific use cases if you understand it the way that we try to understand it, as a tool to add trust to existing processes that have a specific object sequence or document flow.
Yeah, I guess the baseline future is much Unibrighter or much brighter in terms of that nearly all distributed business processes can make use of it. That's what we have learned, and that's just great.
Yeah, and perhaps just to close that idea or that presentation also, I mean, I'm sure that Dan touched the SAP D365 integration demo earlier, and it would also be very interesting to do a recap or a re-demo of that, given the current state of the implementation of the baseline protocol. Hint, hint, Daniel. Let's do something together here. But
Stefan, wait a moment. We have some one question appeared in
okay.
the chat that refers to the integration slate. It is from Bob. I can only read the first name. It's Bob. In the Kona examples, the data being moved between parties is still based on EDI standards? Question mark.
If you consider, I mean, are you online?
Yes, Stefan, I'm online.
Perhaps you can specify a little bit about the question so we get it right.
It looks, first of all, a great presentation, but it looks from what you're showing that you took the IDOC, which is an EDI standard, moved it to JSON, and then put it through the provide stack. So you didn't have to agree on the actual data because the suppliers are already prepared for that information coming from Kona.
Yeah, but perhaps if you think about widening the supplier network, let's perhaps not make this too specific about Kona, because I would rather have Andre and colleagues, of course, going into the details of that in another presentation. But of course, you are limited in terms of integration if not anybody in the ecosystem has something in place, like for example, SAP PI or other mappers or translators when it comes to just reading IDOC messages. I mean, Martin and me have been doing these kind of integration projects for 15 years prior to baseline, and it was in 90% of the cases it was always about mapping, for example, IDOCs or other standards to the specific environment of a smaller player. And in that case, it's not so much helpful if you're only if you have to send out or receive IDOCs. Yeah, it's not only the translation of an IDOC into a JSON. This is rather a technical challenge that can easily be solved, but it's also the common way of setting up the tech stacks that are used for integration, and especially enabling to have that integration layer in all user interface layers. That's what I was wanted to show in that slide here. In the end, every user should be using his well-known and his UI that he or her is used to, he or she is used to, and just add additional, say, user status on SAP to show if a purchase order is baselined or not, or on a dynamic system to show that status. So the UI may look differently, but you have to integrate these status through every layer of the tech stack, and that's a very, very vital point to distinguish between a pure EDI integration. You're totally right with that. It's also in the Kona case, it's relying on SAP standards, like creating another endpoint for an IDOC, which is then translated. But knowing that this IDOC will be sent to a baseline stack is also integrated within the SAP, showing the status on the right user interface, showing the protocol layer where you can perhaps, for example, see that a baseline status message, like some technical issues or a counter party refusing to countersign a specific object, all this is also part of the integration. And this is what an IDOC itself, of course, is not capable of showing to the different participants of an integration process.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's just one addition. I think that's the core. I mean, we use iDocs in the beginning and in the end of every process, just as a data format that is standardized. But of course, all the nice things and all the magic of baseline, it still happens within the Unibright stack, so to say. Everything about circuits and zero knowledge proofs and agreements and baseline work groups agreeing on things, that of course still happens. It's just like as soon as we touch an off-chain system, like for example an SAP system or a Microsoft ERP system, then we use the standards that are in place there and that are used to the customers, if that
Right.
helps.
Right, I agree. It opens up a whole new level of possibilities to make that integration much smoother than just an EDI translator to EDI translator.
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, so much for the scope of baseline and SAP. I mean, there are tons of or thousands of approaches how to tackle that. It was our idea was to show a little bit on the hands-on projects that we are currently working on, how we understand baseline in that context, and also understanding this session as a preparation for the everything around the cookbook, where it's actually about participation. We would love to see one of these sessions contributing to the list of, say, desired systems of record that should be baselined, the desired document flows or object sequences that are worth baselining. And perhaps now that we saw 3 different ERP systems and how it's done on the integration side or even on the coding side, that gives a preparation to actually jump on the part also for tomorrow, reading John's comment here in the chat, to have more hands-on conversations on, yeah, let's work something out. What should be the content of a cookbook that, say, 1 year from now, somebody that has not heard about baseline until then.
Who should that be?
Yeah, I don't know, but perhaps there are still people left, so that they have something in their hands like a cookbook. Okay, how do I approach my existing system and my existing processes to check if they are baselineable, and if so, with what should I start?
Yeah, like, I mean, you think about, I mean, SAP and Dynamics are a little different this way, but if you think about systems like Intuit, QuickBooks, you know, you'd want to build a user experience into that took advantage of baseline attributes and events in a way that you couldn't do from the open source side, right? On the, you know, that needs to be done in the application user experience. So it'd be nice to be able to have a bit of a cookbook that helped you. You're going to have to write that code in your environment, you know, specifically to your environment, but it'd be nice to have patterns and that sort of thing. So that's what I think of as a cookbook. By the way, I want to say about Bob's question about EDI, unless it was, I've been flipping back and forth because I'm sort of the AV specialist for this whole event. But if it wasn't mentioned, there's a pretty interesting project that's happening in the next, actually was supposed to drop right now, but kind of pushed it off because of the event, around EDI and border and customs. So that's yet another case of EDI work, you know, with baseline. And I think there's a lot of speculation that baseline will be useful in opening up the idea of multi-party, practical multi-party EDI, or at least making that more straightforward and tractable. So more to come here, Bob. I'm definitely starting to get all my old friends from like the Best Buy supply chain folks and guys like Rick Rommel. I got to call them up and say, hey, it's time to get going.
Yeah, and I'd also like to jump in and just mention really quick, in regards to the cookbook and putting together some ideas that people can look to and really implement in the future. I think if there's ever an opportunity for us to double dip and like automate something to fix another problem in the process, we should do that if possible. Kind of like the example, I believe, when we were doing the SAP demo earlier, having it autofill so that it's easier to use, people enjoy using it, and it also like is part of being baseline. I think that's all critical. So if you guys have ideas of how to do that, that would be ideal.
John, you're muted.
Thank you. Now for something completely different, if you just for complete fun, if this is a good breaking point, I'll put this in. If you want to get a real kick, go to that link in the chat and open up 2 or 3 of the tabs that are where people are active, and then run audio on all of them at the same time. And you'll get a sense of how this could be actually a way cooler way of doing real conferences. I think we're onto something here, guys. I really do, because I got pulled into one-on-ones. The first time was by this Carnegie Mellon student, and I got to know this guy, which is what I haven't been able to do at a conference in 8 months. They've all been just webinars with people talking. That was the best experience ever. So do that for each other, and just grab somebody, go, I want to talk to you, and go into a private room and, do that. But it's also fun to listen to all of the different work happening simultaneously. It's the best. Thank you.
This reminds me of the voices in my head, actually.
Yes.
Like a cocktail party.
That's how you guys get so much done, right?
Yeah, that's how we go nuts.
Awesome.
Oh, by the way, all of these, what we'll do with these sessions, Daniel, this session, it will probably be by far the largest because it's got so much content running across the streams. But we'll take the live streams and hopefully cut them down. Hopefully nothing goes wrong with those live streams, because that's how we're recording this as well. Because it's going to be 30 hours of 8 streams simultaneously. So hopefully nothing goes wrong with YouTube. And then we'll be able to cut those down. I think I'm gonna have to buy a bigger machine to edit. Can you edit 30 hours of footage? I think DaVinci Resolve will eat eat my computer for that. What's next?
There's a question from Alex Kritikos. Wonderful last name. Can't the state of a state machine be expressed in headers/metadata?
The whole state machine, or just one record?
I don't know, Alex, if you want to come off mute and ask.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, it was kind of carrying on from a previous question where I just thought of the analogy of baseline as a set of metadata or headers that get stamped on top of standardized business messages, whether these are EDI or something else. And then Kyle responded, and this was kind of me responding to Kyle. But I'm interested.